Hello, I'm Amber Turner, the producing artistic director at the Public Theater of Kentucky. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. 2020 season looks different, but we are still here finding new ways to be creative and bring you opportunities. Kentucky Voices is just one of the many ways we bring educational outreach initiatives to our community, Bowling Green and the surrounding area. Kentucky Voices is for Kentuckians, by Kentuckians. When Warren Hammock and Liz Fentress began this program at Horse Cave Theater, its mission was to bring Kentucky stories by Kentucky playwrights to the forefront. The Public Theater of Kentucky has been entrusted to keep this tradition alive. As your local theater, we couldn't survive without you. This pandemic has forced the Public Theater of Kentucky to cancel all of our fundraising events and rework our entire season. Please consider donating by clicking on one of the links below. 100% of your donation is put right back into educational outreach initiatives for our community. That includes programming like Kentucky Voices, Special Stages Theater Therapy for students on the autism spectrum, Sunburst Youth Theater, our programs for adults, and all of our educational classes, workshops, and our playwriting workshops that are connected to Kentucky Voices. Please stay safe and healthy so that we can see you live and in person very soon. Until then, please watch, donate, comment, and enjoy. And thank you for making the Public Theater of Kentucky your local theater. We'll see you soon.
Man, this has not been one of the best days of my life. They know I'm a liberal. They know I'm from the group theater. They knew the group was a hotbed of socialists with a smattering of communists along the way. After years of riding the rails, of boxing in fight clubs, of learning my craft, of working like a Turk to get the group theater to take notice of me, of changing my name from Julius Garfinkel to John Garfield, I finally thought I had it made. The committee, they know. I know people. I told them anything they asked about me, but when they asked me about anybody else, I played deaf and dumb. I didn't know anybody or anything. I'm not doing it to protect myself. I'm doing it for my children. It's my wife, my ex-wife. She was a commie, is a commie, probably always will be a commie. But I told them, I don't know any commies. I lied my ass off. Of course I know commies. Everybody I know knows commies. The thing is, 1, I don't think they have a right to ask me who's a commie. 2, they're a bunch of lame brains with their heads up their own tailpipes. I just came off a picture called Body and Soul, a boxing picture. Abe Polanski, Robert Rawson, Anne Revere, Canada Lee. Holy hell. Almost everybody on the picture was called to testify. How can they suspect me of being a commie? Look at my pictures. Destination Tokyo, Hollywood Canteen, Air Force, Gentleman's Agreement, Pride of the Marines. What could be more patriotic? I'm what they used to call a country club commie. That was before you had to whisper the word communist the way you whisper the word cancer. I'm really more of a liberal than a true communist. But my wife, my ever-loving ex-wife, she is a true believer. She stuck with the party through Stalin's purges, through the Moscow show trials, through the Hitler-Stalin Pact, the war with Finland, the partition of Poland. Once we started divorce proceedings, her party discipline really came to the fore. She's using the kids as a lever to get what she wants. And here's the kicker. After I protected her, after I kept her name out of it, after I lied my ass off to keep her in the clear, she went to the judge and got a court order to keep me from my kids. Why? On the grounds that I was called in front of the committee to testify. I'm a possible communist sympathizer. Can you believe that? A possible communist sympathizer. From her. From her!
When I came out to Hollywood, I had a dream. I wanted to start my own studio, make movies, distribute them to my own chain of theaters. I wanted to be William Fox or Carl Lamal or Lasky or Zucker, Goldwyn, the Warners, any of those guys who came out here with nothing but lint in their pockets and built this industry from the ground up. I decided to work my way up. I started out in the mailroom and worked my way up to assistant producer. I learned the ropes. I made contacts. Finally, I was ready to start my own studio, or so I thought. I guess I met with every banker on both coasts. It turns out the cost of starting a new studio is prohibitive, is the word they use. Those stalwart pioneers like the 49ers in the California Gold Rush, they got here first. They staked out all the good stuff, and by the time I came along, there was nothing good worth owning. The only way to run a studio was to inherit it, buy it, merge into it. Hollywood was just no longer the freewheeling, laissez-faire Wild West. Hollywood had grown into a trust, just like baseball. Let's face it, it wasn't as big as Standard Oil back in the bad old days, but it was big. Oh yeah, in theory, an independent producer could come in and make movies, but that was never going to happen. In theory, there was competition from abroad, but outside of England, who was ever going to export movies to America? France? Italy? They'd have to use subtitles. And you think an American's going to pay money to watch a movie? We stopped doing that when Al Johnson started singing Mammy and the Jazz Singer. Now, each studio was a limited monopoly, controlling the entire means of production, as that old Marxist Karl Marx would say. The studios owned the black lots, the sound stages, the cameras, the equipment, the contracts of the talent, the actors, the directors, writers, technicians, everybody. They owned the chain of distribution. They owned the theaters. They even owned the concession suppliers. Each studio was its own principality, a city-state, and while they competed against one another, they cooperated in keeping out the unions. So, what was I going to do? I didn't want to go back into being a cog in the machine. High up in the machine, but still a cog in the machine. I knew just about everything there was to know about the picture business. Production, distribution, exhibition, publicity. I knew just about everybody who was worth knowing, and most of the skeletons in their closets. So buying a studio was out. Where was my niche? Where was the opportunity? What was the need? That's when this bright boy had the inspiration. What this town needed was a daily showbiz newspaper. Variety covered everything, including back east, and it was weekly. My paper would focus on Hollywood. Movies, radio, recordings, but strictly here and every day. And that's how the Hollywood Reporter was born. I stole a writer or two from the LA Times, from Variety, more than a few from the publicity departments of all the studios, and suddenly I was in business. I was the publisher, the editor-in-chief when necessary. I could sell ads, write, copy, whatever needed to be done. So that is how this Wilkerson's little boy William became one of the most influential men in Hollywood. The first thing I did was take on the trust. Eventually, the Supreme Court stepped in and broke the studios up. The studios could no longer own their own theaters. They now had to make deals with the new theater owners on how to split the profits, and the theater owners kept the concessions. It was a brave new world. So, one Goliath bit the dust. What next? I had noticed how even as far back as the 1930s, communists had started to crop up all over town. Just about every union had at least a small circus of communists, all except the stagehands, and, yeah, you guessed it, they were run by the mob. They took money under the table to assure no strikes would shut down production. I know this is off track, but you'll like this. The mobster who collected the money from Frank Nitti, his real name was Willie Byoff, but everybody called him Willie Buy-Off. What a great name for a bagman. The war put everything on hold. But once VJ Day came and the troops started coming home, quite a few communists came marching home with them. Alger Hiss, the Rosenbergs, Stalin's A-bomb, his H-bomb, Korea. Truth be known, it was on the strength of some of my editorials that Congress became interested in communist infiltration in the film industry. At the height of the Hollywood hearings, I printed a front-page editorial practically every day. I was not shy about printing the names of anybody who did not cooperate with the committee. I praised the loyalty oath clauses that started showing up in all the contracts. The way people used to scan the casualty lists during the war. People checked out the reporter to see who was on the list. Billy's list. Now, mine was not the only list. Red Channels had a list for radio and television. The John Birch Society had its list. The American Legion had its list. Now, there was a lot of overlap, but you could show up on one list and not another, but with all the lists, if you were a communist, you were bound to show up on one of them. And it was a story that could run for years. The studios always claimed they didn't have a list. Now, that may have been true. They didn't need one. There were lists all over the place for them to see. Now, do I believe that people can change? That they can go from being a communist in the 30s to an anti-communist 20 years later? Sure. It's the sneaky bastards who try to hide from the committee, who refuse to appear, who refuse to answer, who plead the fifth. Ask yourself, what are they trying to hide? America is the greatest country on earth. You can be whoever you want to be. You can do whatever you want to do, as long as you have the money to do it. Who in their right mind would ever want to overthrow that?
Okay, let me give it to you straight, right off the bat. I named names. Yes, I'm that Aaliyah Kazan. Now I know what you're going to say. You're thinking how awful it is to place a friend, I guess they're former friends now, to place a friend in the crosshairs of the committee. Well, it's not as black and white as it sounds. For one thing, I saw the party for what it was in 1938, quit it on the spot. They were trying to tell me what plays to do, what actors to use, and what style to do them in. Talk about a reign of creativity. So I told them where they could shove their sickle and take their hammer and beat it. There's no love lost between the party and me. I did worry about my old friends in the group who stayed in the party. The first go-around, I didn't name names. But it didn't take long before I was made to see the error of my ways. Daryl Zanuck called me in and talked about how sad it would be if I were unable to continue directing for Fox. Then, to drive the point home, I got called on the carpet to stand in front of Spyro Skouras, president of the company. He was probably the only other Greek in American movies. He told me in no uncertain terms that I would go in front of the committee and name names, or no one would ever hear my name again. Well, the truth of the matter is, I only named names that had already been named. I didn't add a single name to that list. Hell, one of the guys I named was already dead. It's not like I ruined anybody's career. Their careers were already ruined. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to say I did it for my family, though that entered into it. I did it so I could keep making movies. Sure, I could go back to the theater. I could leave the country. But that's not what I want to do. I'm playing this movie about life on the docks, the mob-run unions. Arthur Miller and I hashed out a script called The Hook. I don't think I'll be doing that one. Art passed me by on the street the other day as though he had never laid eyes on me before. I'm working with Bud Schulberg on another one. Bud is in the same boat as me. We're practically twins. He quit the party when they tried to tell him what to write. So he told them what they could do with their criticism. He named a name or two, and here we are. We're going to call it On the Waterfront. I think what really got him up in arms was the ad. I took out a full-page ad in the trades, explaining why I did it. It's not like I killed anybody. It's not like I threw anybody out of work. Anyway, it'll all blow over any time now. All they have to do is keep their heads down. And as far as the writers are concerned, they're still working. They're getting less money, but they're still working. Before you know it, they'll be back making money the same as they were making before. Some of them aren't even hiding behind a front. They went to England. They're doing fine over there. I hear some of the producers even prefer using the blacklisted writers. They get the same quality of work for much less money. As long as they can keep it at arm's length, and as long as they can deny knowing they're using writers on the blacklist, they don't have to worry about losing their own jobs.
My name is Ayn Rand. You may have heard of me. If anybody knows anything about communism in Russia, it's me. I know about the bread lines. I know about the housing shortages. I know about the favoritism shown to leaders of the party. I know about the famine and starvation and the 5-year plans. I know about the typhus and the dysentery. I left in 1926 after Soviet Civil War was over. I don't know why they call it the Communist Party. Nobody's having any fun. That is Russian joke. It is funny because it is true. I was happy to appear before the committee. During the war, Hollywood made Russian propaganda films. Their excuse was, we were allies, united to defeat Hitler. But no one is ever Stalin's ally. It was proven. We had spies in the Manhattan Project. He spied on his allies. The enemy of my enemy is also my enemy. So, Hollywood made movies to show good side of Russian life. There is no good side of Russian life, not anymore. Mission to Moscow, Song of Russia, North Star, and 1 or 2 Russian characters in every film made during the war. The bartender in Casablanca is a crazy Russian. Everybody who works at Rick's belongs to local underground. Yeah, it is funny because it is true. Sorry, off on tangent, I do that. Communist writers slipped propaganda into their scripts. They wrote about helping people in need. They wanted us to give jobs to jobless, to give homes for homeless, to give food to foodless. I say if they cannot feed themselves, let them starve. If they don't have a home, let them sleep in streets. If they don't have money, let them get job. There are too many people taking advantage of others, parasites, living off the industry of others. There are no free rides. It is for the greater good of all to let the weak fall by the wayside and the devil takes the hindmost. They even couched it in terms of Christianity to appeal to the superstitious and ignorant. If Jesus tells you to feed the poor and minister to sick and give shelter to homeless, it must be a right thing to do. Jesus, just how gullible are the American people? Americans have had it too easy too long. Sure, you had Great Depression, but who didn't? Stalin let thousands starve on collective farms while Roosevelt propped up economy with government programs. Who was bigger communist, eh? You fought in Second World War. Who didn't? Mother Russia lost millions in first wave of Nazi invasion. Russia lost more people in 1 year than America lost in entire war. Russia is big. Russia is mean. Russia is tough. If America had any chance of winning, it can show no mercy. It is funny because it is true. So I write books like The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, and I appear before House Committee on Un-American Activities to spread the word on the evils of communism. We have to stop the threat to world peace. They are out to dominate the world. They are going to spread peace and universal brotherhood even if it kills you. That is no joke. You never know who is helping them. It could be anybody, a friend, a neighbor, a co-worker, a family member. Sometimes they don't even know they are towing the party line, spreading their propaganda, telling lies that sound like truth. Communism is everywhere. We have to do everything we can to stamp it out. The only good communist is a dead communist. Every right-thinking person agrees. It is true. It is not very funny, but it is true.
Well, hello. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Layla Rogers, mother of Ginger Rogers. Well, that's how everybody knows me anyway, Ginger's mother, and I can see why. I manage her career, and I always have. I guess you could call me a stage mother. That's another name people have called me. Anyway, Ginger, well, she wasn't a child star like Shirley Temple. Why? Because we got started rather late. I was a member of the Women's Marine Corps during the Great War, and I came to Hollywood in 1916. I wrote for the silent screens under the name Layla LeBrant for Baby Marie. Oh, she was the Shirley Temple of the silent screen. When she outgrew being a child star, well, I hired her as a stand-in for Ginger. And if nothing else, I am loyal to my friends. Anyway, back in those days, most of the leading scenarists, that's what we called screenwriters back then. Most of the leading scenarists, well, they were women. You had Anita Loos. The gentleman preferred Blonde's girl. Oh, she wrote for D.W. Griffith and Doug Fairbanks. Then you had Jean Matthias, the woman who discovered Rudy Valentino. And she also wrote for Alla Nazimova, among others. And did you know that the first Oscar for screenwriting went to a woman? Frances Marion won 2 years in a row back in the early 30s. Sadly now, there are barely any women screenwriters left. So I left LA in the 20s and went to work as a reporter for Hearst down in the Fort Worth area. William Randolph Hearst was one of the great anti-communist voices of all time. People today, they don't realize that in 1919, the Attorney General of the United States led raids all over the country to root out every communist in the nation. Well, Lenin, he took over Russia in 1917, and just about everyone in the Christian world was worried that Russia was just the first in a worldwide movement. Germany, they had riots caused by the communists. Russians, they invaded Poland trying to spread their Marxist doctrine. Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. What poppycock? Well, I came back here in 1930 with the divorce decree in my purse and Ginger in tow. At first, I had my own theater called Hollytown with a training school for children. And guess who my first pupil was? RKO. They hired me to be an acting coach whenever they had a new prospect who was a diamond in the rough, someone who needed to be cut and polished. Well, I worked with Betty Grable and with Lucille Ball, just to name the two. Then the studio brought me onto the lot, lock, stock, and barrel. Then, whenever they needed my services, I would be right there at hand. Then there was a reshuffling on the lot. They made me the personal secretary to Charles Kerner, the vice president in charge of production at RKO. And before I knew it, I was running the entire literary department. Oh, I read the latest novels to see if any of them could be made into pictures. I was not only looking for plot and character, You know the usual. But I also had to make sure the scripts complied with the Hayes Office regulations and any other kind of un-American material. Oh, I read the scripts and edited them before they went to the soundstage, stamped shoot as written. And 4 out of 5 times, they had me choose the right writer for the job. And just let me say this right now, that there was absolutely no truth to the rumor that I was engaged to J. Edgar Hoover. Not that he didn't ask. We were just, how should I say it, good friends. So while I was a script writer, editor, they handed me a novel called None But the Lonely Heart as a vehicle for Cary Grant. Oh, he wanted to try something more serious. In other words, he wanted to be nominated for an Academy Award. Well, I told them if it were my money, I would give it a pass. Cary's fans would never stand still for him playing a grubby ne'er-do-well from the slums. Plus, the novel is as red as a shiny new fire engine. Well, Mr. Kerner thanked me for my opinion, and I thought that was the end of it. But a couple of weeks later, I found out that they had already bought the book before they even asked me to read it. And what's more, they assigned Clifford Otis to write the script, a well-known commie. Now, why him? He was one of the best-known communists in the country. Well, he was the main writer for the group theater, a hotbed of comedies, if there ever was one. Now, it's obvious Mr. Hearst wasn't bankrolling this one. Then, before you could turn around and spit, I heard Otis was directing it too. It wasn't too long after that, there was another round of musical chairs at the studio. And guess who wound up without a seat? Coincidence? I think not. But onward and upward. You know, it was about that time that Ginger started coming into her own over at Warner's. So she became my full-time job. With me by her side, she didn't have to pound the pavement hunting for the rights agent. Well, I registered as an agent, but I only had one client, and I worked for her all day, every day, weekends and holidays. No rest for the weary. Now, I am her agent, her publicist, her acting coach, her financial advisor, her business manager. And then where should we wind up? That's right, my old studio, RKO. So, how did I wind up in front of the committee? Oh, I wasn't subpoenaed. I volunteered to be a friendly witness. And I am one of the founding members of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of the American Ideals. Oh, the communists are everywhere. The Screenwriters Guild, the Screen Actors Guild, the Directors Guild, every guild and union in town, full to the brim of reds and pinks, traitors and dupes, and just plain dopes. And the comic content creeping into the scripts just like None But the Lonely Heart. Now, I'm not here to gild the lily, and the only consolation I got of that whole debacle was that it didn't make a single red cent. No pun intended. Needless to say, The first name out of my mouth was Clifford Otis. Now, if he can take my job, it's only fair that I should be able to take his. Well, we had a list of 79 names in alphabetical order, and he was one of them. And to paraphrase Oscar Wilde, sometimes telling the truth is more than just an obligation. Sometimes it can be a pleasure.
Hi, let me guess. I look like somebody you know. You just can't quite place me. It's okay. I'm used to it. Well, I didn't play on your high school basketball team. Not unless you went to high school in Joliet, Illinois. You might have seen me in the movies. I met John Garfield doing summer stock, and he invited me out to LA. He had a job waiting for me in a movie he was making, but the financing fell through and it never got off the ground. He felt bad, so he got me a screen test at Columbia. Now, that is a stand-up guy. He didn't have to do that, but as far as he was concerned, it was the right thing to do. The rest isn't exactly history, but for a young single guy alone in Hollywood, just on the verge of a major success, I was living the dream. I did the lead in a string of forgettable B movies and some forgettable supporting parts in a few big-budget feature films. I was even Joan Crawford's personal plaything in Kiss the Bride. I see. A name is coming to some of you. But no, the name that you are thinking isn't my name. It's right on the tip of your tongue. Al Jolson. Wait a minute. That guy can't be Jolson. He's too young. He's too Gentile. He's too Anglo-Saxon. Why do I think that he is Al Jolson? Because I was. I played him in the movies. Both of them. The Jolson Story and Jolson Sings Again. Larry Parks, at your service. I was all tuned up to sing my heart out, and I had the pipes to do it. But Jolson insisted on doing all the singing himself. If he could have found a way to play himself, he would have. And I bet I sound more like Jolson did when he was young than Jolson did when he laid down the soundtrack. And I've got better legs. Jolson did this little skipping step he called a dance. Now, I'm no Fred Astaire, but no Al Jolson either. So he got to sing the songs, and I got to lip sync. Lucky me. And it was gone. Just like that. I was called early in the hearings. I sang like a bird. I answered every question. I was honest. I said I was sorry that I had ever joined the party, and that was the truth. I joined when I was young and dumb and full of that stuff that rhymes with dumb. Oh, there was this girl, and she was a feast for the eyes. She was a dancer with legs that went all the way to where they ought to go. And as soon as I realized she wasn't interested anymore, I just stopped going to the meetings. I forgot I was a member. I forgot I had a card. I actually had to be reminded that I was on the roll. I can't believe it. My mother had been right all along. One mistake, and it follows you the rest of your life.
lightning and thunder. The camera hovers above a nightclub in Atlantic City. Atlantic City, where dreams go to die. Through the skylight, we see a figure at one of the tables, slouched over. The camera descends. Lightning and thunder hide the cut as the camera passes through the skylight, coming to rest at the table. A voice speaks her name. Miss Alexander? She looks up. You can see that she is careworn, looking older than her years, a once beautiful woman who is not aging particularly gracefully. She slurs her words like a lush. What do you want? That was me. That's what the audience sees when Susan Alexander Kane is introduced. At first, Susan looks like a dumb blonde, but it turns out she's really a smart cookie. Unfortunately, that doesn't stop her from becoming a dipsomaniac. My husband, my ex-husband, would say that what I'm going through is a case of life imitating art. But we don't have time for the whole sad story of Dorothy Common-Gore. Just half of the sad story of Dorothy Common-Gore. As you may have guessed, that is not my real name. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. The names have been changed to conceal the facts, okay? Okay, what are the facts? The facts, as I know them, are these. I'm a California girl, born and bred. I went to UC Berkeley for a time, and I got my break when Charlie Chaplin saw me in The Night of January 16th by Ayn Rand. I was doing summer stock at the Carmel Playhouse. He liked me so much, he came back the next week to see me in Cradle Song. He said he cried his eyes out. He wound up crashing the cast party. I mean, really, who is going to keep out Charlie Chaplin? Yes, Charlie did like them young, but it's not what you think. Not exactly. For one thing, without the mustache, Charlie is not a bad-looking man. For another, I was not exactly adverse to the idea of being seen with him at the Brown Derby and Ciro's and Trocadero, all the late-night hotspots. People cluck their tongues and shake their heads about the starlets who are being taken advantage of. Puritans, those grim pilgrims from Plymouth Rock, they're not having fun. They don't want anybody else to. Don't believe me? Why was Ulysses banned in Boston? I knew what I was getting into, and I know what I got out of it. I also knew that being on Chaplin's arm had a really short shelf life, at least until Una O'Neill came along. Ask Paulette Goddard. I did a few B-picture melodramas as the damsel in distress. Frank Capra used me over and over in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Later, he claimed he used me dozens of times. He did, but all in the same picture. I was the dumb blonde on the lot in a lot of the Three Stooges shorts at Columbia. I got a reputation for being hard to work with, which is studio executive jargon for stands up for herself. Kind of like a difficult woman, but with less class. You see, the girls who weren't stars, who weren't getting the Jean Harlow treatment, they didn't have a decent place to change, not even a chorus dressing room. We had to just duck behind the nearest flat and hope the crew had something else to do to set up the next shot. Bunch of peeping toms. I got the girls together behind Jean Harlow's private bungalow, and we sent a petition to Central Casting and the Screen Extras Guild. Oh, Harry Cohn did not like that, not one bit. The next Three Stooges shoot, he had a big joke all planned. There was one scene where they would pick me up, I would struggle, they would toss me in the swimming pool with all my clothes on. No problem. No problem. Except there was a problem on every take. They kept doing it over and over. Every take, something was wrong. Lights, sound, camera, something. And they'd have to take it again. And I'd have to change into dry clothes. Everything. And I mean everything. Soaked to the skin. Just before lunch, I finally got wise. I threw a fit. I called Harry Cohn every name in the book, starting with schmuck and ending with a couple of words Mo Howard had never heard before, at least from a woman. I called in sick the next day, and I haven't worked a day for Columbia since. Not that they know, anyway. But that's a story for another time. Years later, at Harry's funeral, a reporter asked why there were so many people there. They all wanted to see for themselves if the son of a bitch was actually dead. Thank you, Ava Gardner. So, I was wondering where my next paycheck was coming from when Sylvia Lardner gave me a call. Sylvia was the wife of Ring Lardner Jr., the hot new screenwriter over at RKO. She had a job as the social secretary to Orson Welles. Turns out, he needed an armful for the premiere that night at the Grauman Chinese Theater for, I kid you not, The Wizard of Oz. I hesitated. I didn't have a thing to wear. So to sweeten the deal, she threw in the gown she wore on the red carpet at the Oscars that year. I could take it in here and let it out there. We had a deal. The best hand-me-down I ever wore. And The Wizard of Oz. That's why my screen name changed to Dorothy Commongore from Liz Winter. Commongore was real enough, but Orson thought Mary Louise Commongore just didn't have the right pizzazz. He cast me as Susan on the spot. So was Sylvia pimping for Orson, or was she putting a golden opportunity in my path? I guess it kind of depends on where you're standing. So, as they say in the biz, slow fade out. Fade in. By now, it's a couple of years later. I'm married to a screenwriter, Richard Collins. A couple of kids. He's well paid. We have a poodle. We have a pool. You get the picture. Life was good. I could afford to pick and choose my scripts, to wait for one that's right for me. Orson may have been married to Rita Hayworth by then, but he had me in mind for Sister Carrie, Desdemona, or maybe Jane Eyre, depending on which one got financing first. They all fell through, by the way. I'll admit, I may have enjoyed my cocktail hour a bit too much, but I was not anywhere near the worst of the bunch. Susan Hayward could drink me under the table without batting an eye, and believe me, that Brooklyn-born broad could bat an eye. But that's another story for another time. I digress, as my ex would say. Well, into this Garden of Eden, or at least into this rose-colored picture, slithered a serpent in the form of HUAC, the House Committee on Un-American Activities. Sylvia's husband was one of the original Hollywood 10. We knew it was only a matter of time before we were called. And we were right. Richard was in the second 10. I couldn't go to be with him to support him on the day of his testimony. I had to stay home to look after the kids. And that was okay with him. I was folding laundry. I carried the laundry baskets into the living room so that I could hear the hearing on the radio. I had finished the first basket and was starting on the second when I stopped dead. It was my husband's voice, as if he were right there in the room with me. And he was naming names. It never occurred to me that he would name names. I took it for granted that he would not name names. Then I heard him name my name. I don't know what came over me. I felt like I was in a trance. I was watching what I was doing from a distance without the ability to control it. I cut off every strand of hair on my head. The tabloids said I shaved my head. That is not true. I gave myself a GI buzz cut with the poodle clippers. It's funny now. I don't remember laughing then. When Richard got home, the kids were crying and there was hair all over the living room, including the baskets of clean clothes. Long story short, he had me put away, divorced me, and got full custody of the kids. The judge said, "We'll just have to put you under observation for a few days." In my case, a few days turned out to be just over 700 days. To tell you the truth, I really liked the hydrotherapy, the electroshock. Well, even after they let me out, the studios wouldn't hire me. Bit parts, walk-ons, extra stuff, nothing. I had been slated to do Desdemona for Orson, but Canada Lee died and it was never made. That isn't even the half of it. They wouldn't let Ralph Edwards do an episode on me of This Is Your Life. Apparently, I was still too controversial. The network wouldn't even allow me to do You Bet Your Life, even if I was willing to do Groucho. But I don't want to give away all the good stuff all at once. I'm trying to make a deal to sell my story to the movies, and I'll be damned if I will let Richard write the screenplay. I wonder who will play me. It's not an easy part to play.
You don't recognize me, do you? Don't feel bad. Sometimes I can't even recognize myself. Odets. Clifford Odets. Mine is the great American Jewish success story. I was born in a little shtetl named Philadelphia. No, shtetl is a small village in Eastern Europe. It's Yiddish. Don't worry. Both my parents were from the old country, though. One was a Polish Jew, the other Lithuanian. So I have all my kosher credentials. I am a second-generation American Jewish pioneer. We made our way by Conestoga wagon to a distant place called the Bronx. I owe my success to America's great educational opportunities. I dropped out of high school. I dropped out to help out with my family's finances. For a while, I was the messiah of the American theater, if you can believe that. O'Neill was writing pretentious trilogies of 3 acts each, and 9-hour stream of conscious novel plays complete with built-in dinner breaks. None of them had anything to do with what was going on in the country. None of O'Neill's characters grappled with the Great Depression. They was too greatly depressed all on their own. Most of the theaters on Broadway were shuttered, and those that weren't were converted into showing talking pictures. Provincetown Playhouse declared bankruptcy. Now that was before Congress created the Federal Theater Project. Only the Theater Guild was on its feet, up against the ropes, until that little group, later known as the Group Theater, got started. Waiting for Lefty, Awake and Sing, Paradise Lost, Golden Boy. Before I knew it, Hollywood came calling and waving a big fat checkbook under my big cliche Jewish nose, and I was off like a shot. Oh, I told myself I was heading west to change Hollywood into an artist colony. Next thing I know, I'm adopting plays by Lillian Hellman for the screen, and she's adopting mine. In the logic of Hollywood, she was hired by the studio who bought my plays, and vice versa. And boy, did I love that movie money. Oh, not the money, but the lifestyle the money could buy. Well, the American dream. I found a few causes to donate some of it to, so I wouldn't feel so bad about myself. But I was one money-hungry commie. Now, I had a clever plan. I was going to change the system from within. Oh, and I liked all the fringe benefits that went with it. Hollywood parties, souped-up custom cars, souped-up studio starlets. The rest of the country may have been in the throes of depression, but Hollywood was doing just fine. Thank you very much. We were living large for the rest of the country, and they were living vicariously through the successes of Hollywood. Well, how else can you explain the success of Fred and Ginger? All those quarters, Friday night, Saturday afternoon, pocket change, adding up to millions of dollars every year. Lunch money, tip money, nickels and dimes, scrimped and saved for a chance to forget about your troubles for an hour and a half once a week, and maybe a double feature when the audience started to drop. At first, they kept me too busy to think much about it, but eventually I learned the ropes and I started agitating for scripts with more substance. Well, that went over like a shitska at a Seder. Now that's a girlfriend, a Gentile girlfriend at a Passover supper, for those of you who are not familiar with Yiddish. So here I am, America's favorite communist, a pride to my people, all the right opinions, and enough money to live the good life. And I said, thank you very much, you evil capitalist. Oh, could I have some more, please? You really should change your disgusting ways. And I was living the kosher life, except for a goy girlfriend here and there, now and then, which is okay as long as you don't try to take her home and marry her, for Christ's sakes. That would be a shanda. I guess shambles would be the polite translation. Yes, a big pile of shambles. Jewish mothers frown and click their tongues at such behavior. So, WW2 came along, and I played my patriotic part. I wrote propaganda films, and some of them were not all that bad. You see, the real reason for propaganda films is to sell war bonds. Attendance went up, and with defense plants working triple shifts, motion pictures houses stayed open 24 hours every day except Sunday. Sunday opened just after church. Most of the prints were ruined with scratches and tears by the time they were sent back to the studio. They had been shown so much. So, after the war, I was ready for more of what became before, with a double helping of that good old pre-war top-dollar Tinseltown pale. Except, now the Nazi threat was gone, and the commie threat appeared full force. I didn't think twice. I told them everything, and what I didn't know, I made up. So I thought, okay, I came clean. Now I can get back to sticking it to the system by taking them for all the dough they want to throw my way. As far as I could tell, everything was copacetic. Every Gentile gentleman knows what that means. Sadly, that was not to be. Suddenly, I saw assignments going to everybody around me. I got the message. So I set out the remainder of my contract, and on my own time, I typed out the outlines for a couple of plays about how venal and materialistic Hollywood is. Oh yes, the irony is not entirely lost on me. Next thing I know, I had a couple of new plays running on the Great White Way again, plus a revival of Golden Boy. They're even thinking about a musical. Right now, I'm writing a scenario for what I hope to be my next movie. It's about a Broadway publicist feeding stories to a ruthless gossip columnist who is not Walter Winchell, a sweet guy who likes to make and break careers, anything to sell newspapers. It's got a real cynical edge to it. I want to call it the sweet smell of success. It just drips bitter irony, doesn't it? So what if it bites the hand that feeds me? With the right deal, we're talking Hollywood money again.
It's a shame they all had to go to prison. The Hollywood 10. It was practically a fluke. If there's a God in heaven, he has one hell of a sense of humor. It was for contempt of Congress. They had it all planned out. They were going to have it quashed on an appeal by a sympathetic judge. Oops. Fate had Joker up its sleeve. The old bastard dropped dead before he could rule. The appeal went to an ultra-conservative Herbert Hoover appointee, and before you could say Jackie Robinson, our lives were changed forever. I think they sent Dalt to Ashland on purpose to prevent us from visiting him. We couldn't afford to travel from California to Kentucky every week, especially not now. The studios had canceled the contracts of all 10. We could see the writing on the wall. The lean kind had come to devour the fat kind, if you know your Old Testament. It was time to put those skills I learned in my junior year of high school economics class to good use. It's a good thing I was a child of the Depression. I knew how to cook and sew, and what I could do with leftovers could rival the miracle of the loaves and fishes, if you remember your New Testament. I could squeeze every last penny out of a dollar. Now, Southern California, some of the most expensive real estate on the face of the earth, and we were living in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in LA. So the next obvious step was to sell and move to a more economic place. But let me tell you, once the realtors smell blood in the water, there's no way to get a fair market value for your property. Then it was a question of where we moved to. Did you ever wonder why so many American expatriates lived in Paris after World War I? The city of lights, the creative freedom, the electricity of experimentation, the Eiffel Tower, Gertrude Stein's at-home salon, the Arc de Triomphe, the Champs-Élysées, the Louvre and all its treasures, Shakespeare and Company, the serene siren song of the Seine? No. While all of those are nice ancillary considerations, the real reason so many American poets, musicians, and artists moved to Paris was it cost about 1/5 of what it cost to live in New York, and there was no prohibition in Paris. So if you were an alcoholic on a tight budget, Paris was the perfect place for you. So the question was, where was our Paris going to be? The Paris after World War II was not the same Paris that welcomed Hemingway and the Fitzgeralds, the whole lost generation. We were not the lost generation. We were the better dead than red generation, and I have to say that committee was making me see red. Despite the way MGM made it appear in An American in Paris, post-war Paris was not for us. London seemed a world away. They were still digging out of the rubble from the Blitz. They were still rationing some goods, and it would cost too much to pull up roots and immigrate overseas, and things were tight, and I felt completely alone. Now, this is not to say that if Dalt had been there with me, things would have been all that much better. Most of his time would have been spent bent over olive oil, his Olivetti typewriter, cranking out scripts for the studios. But with him behind bars, I was a jailhouse widow for sure. I had to deal with the butcher and the baker and all the filmmakers, and the water, and the power, and the phone, and the schools, the smallpox, and polio vaccinations, the braces, the corrective shoes, and keeping up his morale. And not letting the children see me worry where the rent was coming from. All he had to do was sit on his rumpled rump in a minimum security prison in Ashland, Kentucky. It's not like he was breaking rocks in the hot sun with a 9-pound hammer. I'm not saying it was a country club, but I would have minded a few weeks off myself. I had to make sure everything was ready for him as soon as he got out. All the paperwork ready for him to sign. There was very little to move. We had to sell nearly everything. I figured it was cheaper to buy what we needed when we got where we were going. Our Spanish-speaking, semi-tropical paradise just outside Mexico City. Luckily, we had leased a place in an English-speaking artist enclave. Half the families in our part of the plaza were refugees from Hollywood. Writers, directors, a few actors, production designers. Now, some of us knew more Spanish than others. And it was understood that those of us who could speak it with any acuity would accompany the others into town, to the market. On the week before Thanksgiving, I went in every day, sometimes twice a day. On that Wednesday, I went in 4 times. I don't know how many times I did that, and I wore out so many sandals. Once the underground networks got set up to smuggle the new scripts to the fronts, I thought life would get back to normal. Boy, was I wrong. Dalt had to write twice as many scripts to make half as much money. The fronts didn't have his reputation, so the producers could lowball them. Once they took their handling fee, that left us with less than half of what we were accustomed to before Dalt had been called to appear in front of that cockamamie committee. Along the way, one of Dalt's nom de plume won an Academy Award for Roman Holiday. And another year, a different pen name won for The Brave One. To tell you the truth, for the next 10 years, almost half of the Oscars for screenwriting went to blacklisted writers. Or rather, to the fronts or pseudonyms of blacklisted writers. And then one day, out of the blue, it was all over with. Not with a bang or with a whimper, but a sigh. A long, deep sigh. Kirk Douglas and Otto Preminger duked it out over who deserved the credit for breaking the blacklist. You want to know the truth? It was us, the writers' wives, the ones who did not divorce those hard-headed lunkheads, the ones who took for better or for worse at its word. We were the ones slipping the scripts to the agents and producers, arranging the payments, making sure the IRS got its cut and kept everybody happy. If there had been a women's auxiliary for the newly formed Writers Guild of America, we would have been the board of directors. So, when Dalt received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Writers Guild of America, he said that he owed his success to his parents and me. Who am I to disagree with such an illustrious intellect?
I have been an opponent of communism all of my life. I became a stockbroker out of college, but when the representative from my district in New Jersey died, some friends of mine asked me to run. I won the election to fill out the rest of his unexpired term, and there's where I stayed for 16 terms. In 1936, the Speaker appointed me to the Committee on Un-American Activities. Dies was the chairman at the time. I must admit, I was never a big fan of the New Deal. And that man, you know who I mean, that man with his fireside chats, he was doing everything in his power to turn America red. Bailing out the farmers in the Dust Bowl, paying dairy farmers to cut production to stabilize prices. You know, what really got my goat was his Work Progress Administration. More like the Workers' Progress Administration, if you see what I mean. Then within the WPA, there was an even worse use of our top tax dollars at work. That man paid artists to paint and writers to write. Most of it was pure propaganda, singing the praises of the WPA and the New Deal. Even worse, that there was a branch of the WPA devoted to the theater. The theater. They called it the Federal Theater Project. They set up theaters all over the country, Harlem, Manhattan, Minneapolis, every major city. They had a flatbed truck that took plays into the Okefenokee Swamp in Georgia and Florida, places where they had never seen a play before in their lives, for goodness sakes. And the project was just riddled with reds from top to bottom, inside and out and all the way through. They did Macbeth set in Haiti during the slave revolt with black actors in Harlem. They did Julius Caesar in modern clothes with a Caesar who looked like Mussolini. They did the Living Newspaper, a play each week based on the headlines. 1/3 of the nation. It was about unemployment. AAA Plowed Under, about the Dust Bowl. But the one that topped them all was The Cradle Will Rock, a musical about a wildcat strike in a steel town in Pennsylvania called Steel Town. Very funny. Well, that was the last straw. Congress pulled the funding for the play and soon after for the whole lousy project. Good riddance. But then Wells and Houseman went on with their production under their own steam. They formed a company overnight and hired all the actors who lost their jobs at the theater project. The stinking play became a hit. What kind of world do we live in? During the war, the committee flushed out fascists and Nazi sympathizers and business and politics. Once it was over, the Republican Party finally took control of the House again. The Speaker made me chairman of the committee. Our committee, at least the members of the majority, wanted to look into the effect that communists working in Hollywood had in the film industry, slipping communist propaganda into the films being shown to unsuspecting red-blooded Americans across the country. The publisher of the Hollywood Reporter was writing front-page editorials about communist infiltration of the unions out there. The first group we dealt with became known as the Hollywood 10. You know, when asked, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? They refused to answer. They stood on the Fifth Amendment. If that didn't prove they were guilty, nothing did. Some of them even had the temerity to question the constitutionality of the committee itself. Can you believe that? Oh, we slapped them with contempt of Congress so quick, it made their heads spin. All of them wound up doing time in federal prison. Yeah, the studios had each employee sign a loyalty oath, and anybody who didn't sign or anybody who refused to appear before the committee or refused to answer the committee's questions lost their jobs. So naturally, the left decided to fight back. They couldn't fight it out in the open, so what they did was attack my personal integrity. Somebody got a hold of some documents that suggested that I hired some people from my staff who were not qualified for their positions. Moreover, they claimed that I received kickbacks from those employees and failed to pay taxes on the income. Can you believe that? They had the unmitigated temerity to impugn my integrity. Commie SOBs. What's worse, copies of the documents wound up in the in trays of Jack Anderson and Drew Pearson, and before you knew it, it was all over the radio. It was on every front page of every yokel paper in the country. And before you know it, I have to answer a subpoena and appear in federal court. On advice of counsel, I remained silent and stood on my rights under the Fifth Amendment. And what did it get me? Well, here I am, Danbury Prison in Connecticut. My second or third week, I ran into a couple of prisoners. I was mopping out the toilets on my floor. Hey, Chairman Thomas. I turned around. One asked me if I recognized them. They looked familiar, but I couldn't place them. Turned out to be Lester Cole and Regan Lardner Jr., two of the Hollywood 10. Why did they have to send me here? Well, they're gone now. Their time is up. What kind of world do we live in?
Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Joel Carpenter. At least it is today. My original name was Arnold Pismanoff. When I moved to Hollywood, it became Arnold Mainoff. I just dropped the Piz. Sounded too much like somebody fresh off the boat from the shuttle to Ellis Island. It stayed Mainoff for 4 wives. I guess my legal name is still Mainoff, but I don't think of myself that way. I stopped using Mainoff after it was named at the HUAC hearings. First by Edward Dmytryk at his second appearance when he had his come to Jesus moment and told them everything they wanted to know. Then by a no-name who I'd never met in my life. Within a matter of months, I became Joel Carpenter. Television was new. It was live. It ate up material like the whale that swallowed Jonah. I figured as long as I was starting all over, it may as well be in a new medium. And it wasn't just schlock stuff to pay the bills. I wrote some scripts for The Defenders, for The Naked City. Carpenter isn't my only pen name, but it's the one that producers trust the most. Just last year, I was up for 2 Emmys under 2 different names. Either one won. I did a couple of Route 66s for fun, and to tell you the truth, it didn't feel all that bad, except for the drop in pay. Maybe if I'd been higher on the Hollywood totem pole, it would have been different. I had 3 sets of alimony and child support to pay, and 1 current family to support. My wife got blacklisted, too, for blaming the death of one of her friends on the HUAC during the eulogy. So, while she goes all over to pick up work in Canada, England, Australia, everywhere that speaks English as its national language except South Africa, she won't take apartheid money. That was our lives until we separated. There's been a lot of pressure on both of us. All of us. A friend of mine clued me in on a way to multiply my sales. He's another member of the Named Ones. He noticed that 77 Sunset Strip, Surfside 6, and Hawaiian Eye all follow the same formula. So basically, you write 1 script and then change the character names and place names, and you can sell the plot 3 times. Now that's good thinking. High art? No. Good economics? You bet. One place I know I won't be sending any of my scripts is Tales of Wells Fargo. Not because it's a Western. I'd like to try my hand at a Western. If it sold, it could increase my opportunities. No, the reason I won't submit there is the head writer, Martin Berkeley, set the all-time record for naming names, and one of the names was mine. I can't afford to blow my cover. There's a new series I'm excited about. I've been invited to do a couple of episodes for the first season. It's about a doctor who's convicted of his wife's murder, but an accident on the way to the death house frees him. Hot on his trail is a dedicated detective determined to bring him to justice, and a kind of good guy Inspector Javier. Here's the twist. To clear his name, the doctor has to find the one-armed man he saw running from the house. The doctor's chasing him. The detective's chasing the doctor. I think it's going to be a winner. And to make it even better, the writer's room, is filled with faces I recognize. The names I never heard of, but the faces sure are familiar. Looks like a convention of blacklisted writers. Maybe we should form ourselves a club, the Named Ones. This is going to be a lot of fun. I've already finished one script. It has a perfect part for my wife, my estranged wife, but she won't get it. See, I can change my name. She can't change her face. Sorry. I've been getting a lot of heartburn lately. Really tight. Been getting this tightness in my throat and jaw as quick as it comes. Goes away as quick as it comes, almost. Just take a couple of Anacin. And I'm right back in business. But they're coming quicker and lasting longer with less time in between. Whew, okay. That's better, see? Nothing to worry about. One of these days, it'll all be over. One of these days, it'll be like nothing ever happened. One of these days, everything will be back to normal. Except it won't. For the rest of our lives, we'll remember what we had to do to stay alive until it was over. And it'll never be the same. We'll never be the same. Nothing will ever be the same again. I just hope I'm around to see it.
Even before I went to Hollywood, I was a credit to my race. I played Bigger Thomas in the Mercury Theater production of the stage adaptation of Richard Wright's Native Son. Orson Welles was a suspected communist. Richard Wright was a known communist, living as an expatriate in Paris. Strike one. I had worked with Orson before. I was Banquo in the Voodoo Macbeth he and John Houseman did for the Harlem Project back in the Federal Theater days. We played 10 weeks at the Lafayette Theater in Harlem, 2 weeks on Broadway, and then a national tour to every Federal Project playhouse in the country. In fact, I played Banquo in Negro theaters all over the nation for years. Anytime I needed a payday, I could always trot out old Banquo to cover the rent. I was the first Negro producer of a serious play on Broadway. You can check the record. On Whitman Avenue, it was a small play, and it didn't run for long, but I got a Broadway producing credit. Me, Canada Lee, a Broadway producer. I even had a profile done in Playbill magazine. I knew and worked with a lot of the important writers in the Harlem Renaissance, Langston Hughes, Paul Robeson, and I even started our own theater for colored people, the Negro Playwrights Company. I was also the first Negro actor to play a white part on Broadway. I played the villain, Deba Sola, in The Duchess of Malfi. People joke that I did it in white clown makeup. That would never work. No. What we used was mortician's makeup. It's a little thicker than stage makeup. After all, it has to last an eternity. I'm not sure it was convincing from the first few rows in the orchestra, but from, say, row 10 back, no one could tell. Some of the photographs convinced me I could pass if I wanted to. It was hell to get off every night, though. I wonder what would have happened if I had gone into Sardi's with it on. Could I have passed for a white customer? Maybe I'll try it sometime. I know it sounds like I'm tooting my own horn, but as Satchmo told me, if you don't toot it, who will? I've had quite a life so far, and it's not over yet. I was a jockey at age 14 until I grew too large to ride thoroughbreds. I became a boxer. I won 20 out of 30 fights. My last bout was against a guy called Julius Garfinkel, not many Jewish boxers. I won the match, but he managed to detach a retina. He had a good left. My boxing days were done. A few years later, he became a pretty good actor, came out here, changed his name to John Garfield, and did pretty well for himself. As luck would have it, I just finished a boxing picture with him, body and soul. I was the Joe Louis character. Ben Chaplin called the Brown Bomber, just in case anyone missed that connection. Just about everybody involved with the film got called up. Called up. Makes it sound like we've been drafted. John Garfield is a good man. He didn't mention any names. Anna Revere told them very nicely where they could put their queries. Me? I refuse to appear. They have no right to question me about my political affiliations. You don't believe me? Ask the Bill of Rights. I got slapped with a contempt citation. My lawyer is fighting it now. Know why they think I'm a communist? Civil rights. Marches, rallies, donations, voting registration drives. Old J. Edgar Hoover thinks anything that challenges the status quo must be communist in origin. So, I must be a communist. Or a dupe of the communists. It would be funny if it weren't so damn serious. Strike two. After Pearl Harbor, I tried to enlist, but that detached retina kept me out of the service. When this all blows over, I'm all set to make Othello. If I don't toot it, who will? Orson is directing. He wants Dorothy Comingore to be my Desdemona. I hope he gets his funding finalized soon. I need to get a checkup, but I'm waiting until I take my pre-shooting physical. I think it must be an ulcer. Right now, I'm taking 5 or 6 glasses of bromo seltzer a day, and aspirin by the handful. I never liked buttermilk as a kid, but I drink about a quart a day now. My wife says it's nerves. I say it's that damn committee. If I get blacklisted, then my movie career goes by the way of Fat Sam, and it's back to bankroll 8 times a week in towns that don't even have a decent stage. I'm on my way to the federal courthouse for the hearing on my contempt charge. Anybody have a bromo handy?
I Married a Communist. That was the title of a B movie? Wait, maybe it was a radio show. I led 3 lives. I was a communist for the FBI. Those were some popular titles during the McCarthy era. At any rate, that's how I got blackballed. Blacklisted? I want to make 2 things abundantly clear. I was never a member of the Communist Party. My husband was, but in reality, he was not a real communist. He was more of an idealistic wannabe. Communists believe in the violent overthrow of capitalistic political structures. My husband didn't believe in the violent overthrow of bathwater. He would have been all for the reign of terror until the heads really began to roll. Then he would have tried to find a non-violent alternative. So how did I wind up getting blacklisted? Therein hangs a tale. I was a hot property, if I do say so myself, and that is not a matter of mere vanity. I took a small part in a detective story and turned it into a star turn. When Kirk Douglas bought the play, he invited me out to recreate my role, No screen test, thank you very much. Now, I was not the looker that Liz Taylor was in, say, A Place in the Sun, and I was not as sexy as Monroe in 7-Year Itch. Who the hell is? But I had kind of a bad girl, femme fatale, something vibe that could turn heads when I had to. And I was married to an up-and-coming screenwriter who was just one script away from that breakthrough screenplay that would put him up there with Ben Heck and Maury Riskin and Dalton Trumbo, a paragon in the pantheon of top-paid writing talent. And that is where our story started to go right off the rails. First film out of the box, I won Best Supporting Actress at the Cannes International Film Festival for recreating my stage role in Detective Story. And the studio's For Your Consideration campaign got me an Oscar nomination quicker than you could say Lee Grant. I got a telegram from Uta Hagen congratulating me. And if I had won the Oscar, I would have thanked her in the acceptance speech. She deserved it. She worked with me on the audition piece that got me the part in the first place. Well, in the middle of all that, the Hollywood 10 was called to appear before HUAC. It was the House Committee on Un-American Activities, but everybody called it HUAC because hookah just sounds stupid. Anyway, the Hollywood 10 sparred with the committee, and my husband, rather than to be happy at dodging a bullet, he was jealous. Why hadn't he been called? He was more talented than most of those guys. I tried to explain that it was not a top 10 list. They weren't called because they were the best writers. Where was Ben Heck? Where was Maury Riskin? They were called because Ayn Rand or Martin Berkeley or somebody just as noxious had fingered them in a closed-door deposition. He would have none of it. He demanded that he be heard. I can't imagine anybody stupid enough to ask to appear before the committee. And he was not usually a stupid man. In fact, he was one of the most non-stupid men I ever knew. He got the finest leftist legal advice that Hollywood money could afford, and off he went to Tilted Sawmills. When he appeared in front of them, he barely spoke a word. Name, rank, and serial number. Or in his case, name, address, and Screenwriters Guild membership number. He was not eloquent. He was not forceful. His silence did not speak volumes. I knew he was sunk the minute he failed to open his mouth. But there was still a chance for me, but then I had to go and open my big mouth in public. Sometimes I'm not as smart as I think I am either, or rather I just don't know when to keep my own big fat mouth shut. A friend of mine died. We had appeared together on stage in Detective Story. He had appeared in front of the committee, and as a consequence, he had not been able to get work. Old friends wouldn't talk with him. His agency dropped him due to lack of interest. Imagine that. He ran out of his unemployment eligibility. He couldn't get a job as a toilet attendant because everybody recognized him as that commie actor. I'm not surprised if he took to drink, or worse. His health deteriorated. He sold pretty much everything he had, and his wife took the kids and moved in with her parents. I don't blame her. She had some hard decisions of her own to make. It's different when you have kids, but in the end, he died alone. It was like he had smallpox or polio or something. People were afraid if they were seen with him, they'd be infected too. I know I kept thinking, I'll go by and see him tomorrow. I'll call tomorrow. I don't care what anybody says. Tomorrow never comes. Can you imagine the stress he must have been living under? And at his memorial service, I said so. The committee liked it when you named names, so I named some names of my own. I named the names of the congressmen on the committee. I laid his death at their feet. Apparently, one of the mourners was an FBI confidential informant, and without even appearing before the committee, I was blacklisted as any blacklistee could ever be. That was 12 years ago. There's been a lot of sewage. I was going to use another word. There's been a lot of sewage under the bridge since then. Now the shoe's on the other foot. The victims of the blacklist are the heroes now, and except for John Wayne and maybe one or two others, the persecutors can't get arrested in this town, so to speak. Or at least they're no longer on the A list, which for many of them is the worst kind of personal hell. So I'm right back where I started. I missed 12 years of roles right during the best years of any actress's career. But I tell you, I have more life experience than a drum major can shake a parade baton at. The critics say my work is more mature, more subtle, more real than it otherwise would have been. We'll never know, will we? Tonight I am up for the Golden Globe for Best Performance by an Actress in a Supporting Role, just like 1951. This time I'm up for In the Heat of the Night. Maybe everything that goes around comes around, after all.
If you were to ask anyone on the street, what were Christ's last words on the cross, you'd most likely get, "It is finished," which sounds more noble than "it's done" or "it's over." A good Roman Catholic, especially one from a parochial school, would say, "Consummatum est." But that's not quite right. I don't know what the original Aramaic is, but the writers of the Gospels spoke Greek. What they recorded was tetelestai. That's what the Romans translated as consummatum est. But to be accurate, the phrase translates better as "the debt is paid" or "all paid." If I were to come out with a modern revision, I might translate it as "paid in full." There's no way to know how many friendships were broken, how many trusts betrayed. I don't know how many careers were ruined, how many feuds last to this day. You would expect, with all of the naming of names and the extreme emotions that tore people apart, that there would have been a tetelestai, a reckoning, where debts and scores and grudges were all settled. Instead, it all just petered out, gradually faded into the background. So, as far as the blacklist is concerned, maybe consummatum est is more appropriate. It just ended. Dalton Trumbo made a speech to the Writers Guild in which he talked about there being no heroes, no villains, only victims, including those who name names, who were under the same pressure as those whom they named, but chose a different way of dealing with the pressure. Elia Kazan dealt with it in his art. On the Waterfront shows people cowed by a tyrannical union leader and his thugs, brought down by a stool pigeon who goes from being one of them to learning what the right thing is and then doing it, using art to justify his decision. And it's more mature, more ambiguous, more subtle than all his works that preceded it. Maybe he had just matured as an artist. Or maybe, if he had not been put through the experience, he would not have been able to feel what he needed to feel to make it a work of art. Lillian Hellman wrote a memoir, Scoundrel Time, in which she named the names of the people who named the names. She died before her lawsuit went to court. Some of the names who were named started to work on the Screenwriters Guild of America to restore the names of the screenwriters, to have their real names recorded in the credits, and the awards their films won to carry their actual names. Kind of like Roger Maris when he beat Babe Ruth's record. They get their listing in the record book with an asterisk and a shiny new statue. Some of the trade publications, particularly the Hollywood Reporter, have published mea culpa editorials. The red baiting, the communist witch hunt, seems like more of a national nightmare, political paranoia, how to deal with the Cold War tensions. The blacklist took its toll. Suicides, alcoholism. John Garfield died of a heart attack just weeks after his appearance. Canada Lee died in the taxi on the way to his contempt hearing
Another heart attack. Disney used it to try to break the cartoonist union. Jack Warner used it as a way to settle personal scores. All he had to do was drop your name and you were as good as done. Harry Cohn used it as a way to cut costs by hiring blacklisted writers at a fraction of the cost and turned a blind eye to who did the real writing. It brought out the worst in people. It created a few unexpected heroes. I think I agree with Lillian Hellman. The most un-American thing in America was the House Committee on Un-American Activities. When the board of the Academy gave a Lifetime Achievement Award to Elia Kazan, half the audience gave him a standing ovation. The other half booed. I wrote my doctoral dissertation in history about the blacklist. I used a line from Dalton Trumbo's speech as my title, Only Victims. After being one of the Magnificent Seven, after being nominated for Best Supporting Actor for The Young Philadelphians, after playing Napoleon Solo in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. on television, I think I'm proudest of writing a book that no one reads. I thought I owed a debt to history to tell the truth, to Telestai.